we and the Western reporting fraternity need to examine ourselves and ask what our values are. Do we actually have a single set of moral standards which we adhere to in all times and places? Because if we aren't, if we have one set of values for people inside Europe and one set of values for non-European, non-white people, we're racists. We're barbarians too. Now, I've been reporting Yemen for the last 7 years since that war started. And although what is happening is terrible in Ukraine, latest calculation is that 230,000 people have died from bombing by the Saudis or by starvation and malnutrition, which is endemic now in Yemen. The United Nations have called it the greatest humanitarian catastrophe of the 21st century. Now, Britain is actually part of the Saudi assault on the Yemeni people. We are providing arms, we're providing military guidance, we're providing, through our role as penholder in the United Nations Security Council, diplomatic protection, particularly against any investigations into war crimes committed by the Saudis in the war. In other words, we are the protector and we are complicit in something which is utterly barbarous and feral, just as barbarous and feral as what Putin is doing now. And that's been going on for 7 years. Now, if the Western media had given 100th of the attention they have to Ukraine, to what's going on in Yemen, I don't think that it would have been politically possible for a succession of British prime ministers and foreign secretaries to allow that to happen. I don't think the world opinion would have tolerated it. But it is noticeable that we have had this series of cries for a no-fly zone to be imposed over Ukraine. Now, the case for a no-fly zone over Yemen, I was there at the start of the Yemen war in Sana'a and Sadr, and I saw the absolute horror of the double-tap strikes on hospitals, on markets, on private houses. Now, how many lives would have been saved if we'd imposed a no-fly zone on Yemen? But there was no cry went up for that. Of course, we should support the leadership and the Ukrainian people against an illegal and barbaric invasion. But we do also need, when the dust is over, to be consistent in our foreign policy. So if we're against the Russian attacks on the Ukraine, we should be equally opposed to the barbarism of the Saudi attacks on the Yemen. Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, is the primary architect of the war in Yemen. And as he launched that war and oversaw it, he ran a PR campaign in the West. Rave reviews of how he was modernizing Saudi Arabia. He was going to allow women to drive the car, for instance. And here was this absolutely tremendous figure who was going to put a real zing into Saudi Arabia. And huge sums of money, millions of pounds, were plowed into this campaign to make him look a very agreeable person. Unfortunately, he isn't. He's deeply implicated, I think, in the horrific chopping up of Jamal Khashoggi. And even that, he hasn't had to pay a price for. I once asked a senior Foreign Office official why we continued to do business with Saudi Arabia. He said, that's simple. 35,000 manufacturing jobs and oil.
First we thought Britain was a friend, but now we feel the British government are criminals because of what's happening here. They're committing crimes, killing children and pregnant women.
One of the things we've learnt in this conflict is that Liz Truss, the British Foreign Secretary, is horrifically out of her depth. She seems to regard this as a series of photo opportunities, portray her in a series of heroic postures, in a sort of pathetic homage to Margaret Thatcher, who, whether you like her or not, and I did admire Margaret Thatcher, was a genuinely serious, moral, and international figure. Liz Truss is a joke, and one of her most sort of ludicrous remarks was her agreement that British people could go to Ukraine to fight.
So you support Britain, people from Britain, going over to Ukraine to help in the fight?
Absolutely, if that's what they want to do.
This is wrong on so many different grounds. First of all, it's very dangerous for some young man in search of adventure to turn up in Ukraine. He would be a danger to everybody else, including the Ukrainians and himself. He might well get killed. It's terribly dangerous, I would say inflammatory and reckless for a British Foreign Secretary, for anybody to say anything other immediately than stay at home. But the second reason is that it opens British governments up to the charge of double standards. You know, there are a lot of Muslims who would like to go and fight against what they see as a barbaric Israeli occupation of the West Bank. Why you were sanctioning of visits, you know, by British young people to Ukraine, but not to fight for what they would see as Palestinian rights or other wars across the Middle East. There's no shortage, unfortunately. What we're seeing here, therefore, is a double standard, which is very troubling, and we're now seeing quite explicitly stated by Western reporters and others the reason for the double standard, namely racism. They're not got blue eyes, they're not civilized, they don't happen to live in Europe. People have been conditioned for a long time to consider brown people as inferior to white Christians with blue eyes in the West. Of course, this has been going on for hundreds of years. And so what we are seeing is the latest iteration of this. Another example, yes, we are seeing Lavrov, for instance, interrogated by Western journalists about the dreadful conduct of the Russians' illegal invasion. But did we see the same interrogation of George W. Bush within weeks of the Iraq invasion, which was equally illegal? I don't think we did.
Just wanted to quickly show you this. This is a Saturday Night Live video on the invasion of Kandahar. Have a look at that.
Kandahar!
Kandahar!
Kandahar! Gee golly wow, boy, we got him now. Kandahar! Kandahar! Say Taliban, move your minivans. Kandahar!
Kandahar! That's happy news, no more bearded dudes. Kandahar!
That's enough, I can't watch any more of that. I think you could write a book about that Saturday Night Live show. It tells you so many things about the West and war. The first thing is it doesn't really exist for the West. There you have American forces going into Afghanistan, a deadly serious thing, especially if you are Afghan. You're going to be bombed, killed, intimidated, terrorized, tortured. In American popular culture, that's just sort of something you sing about and joke about. And if you compare it to Ukraine, you can't imagine a similar sort of jokey atmosphere. It just couldn't happen. Again, what you have here is the strong message that war is okay, it's actually welcome, it's something you can sing and dance about when it happens in Muslim countries, but it's something which is deadly serious when it happens in a European country. We have to get our set of values right. There is something deeply unserious about the West. This is a criticism made by many Islamic intellectuals of Western culture, that there's a sort of vapidity, there's a sort of narcissism, a lack of any values worth talking about and defending in the West. That's how we're seen. And when you show me that film, you can see why people think that. Something's gone very seriously and tragically wrong. We've suddenly started to divide the world into places which quite frankly don't matter, where anything can be done. The fact that in Guantanamo Bay we still have people who are completely innocent of any crime, never been charged with a crime, and have suffered terrible tortures at the hands of American guards, and yet they're still there, lingering there. It just shows a basic, fundamental racism which we have to acknowledge about ourselves. We and the Western reporting fraternity need to examine ourselves and ask what our values are. Do we actually have a single set of moral standards which we adhere to in all times and places, or are we simply on the side of white European countries of a Christian background? Who exactly are we? What do we stand for? What are we saying to the world? If you look at the mainstream media now, they are unable and unwilling to cover so many really important issues in a generous-hearted way which embraces all points of view. There's increasing need for independent media. You should consider joining Double Down News on Patreon.